Hello, welcome back. I hope you're well. We've had a silly month of June, just a lot of things happening in June. Careering around the UK, delivering various workshops, and then there's a lot of school sports days and school fairs. There's just a lot. There's a lot in June. So I hope you're well and keeping everything together as much as it's possible. We've got an absolute gem of an episode today for you with Katy Bowman. And for some reason, whenever I say her name at the moment, I want to say Katy Bowman. If you haven't seen Katie Morag, which is a lovely children's television program and book, then you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, Katy is, I'm sure you're familiar with Katy's work, but she is a biomechanist, I guess, first and foremost, an author and a parent and a public educator who's kind of shaped how many of us think about movement. I remember reading Andrew's copy of Move Your DNA sort of around the time that actually Andrew and I met, which I guess must have been 2014, 2015. And it was kind of the first time I'd read anything that really put into words what my sort of jumbled brain had been thinking. That I didn't really see myself as an exerciser, but I was always active. And this kind of exercise has been quite a strange concept. I remember reading parts of Move Your DNA and it really kind of putting together a lot of the jigsaw pieces for me. So whether you've come across Katy through her concept of nutritious movement, or you've read some of her books or listened to her excellent podcast, she's really influenced thousands across the world. In this episode, she chats with Andrew about movement variety, parenting, in nature, behavioural flexibility, and how our bodies tell the story of our lives. It's a huge conversation, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. Have fun.
How to stand on shifting sand. How to bend but stay intact.
Okay, I am here today with Katy Bowman, who many of you probably already know is one of the people that we've wanted to get on the podcast, really since we started. I always joke that the podcast is just an excuse to talk to people, people I've always wanted to talk to. Mm-hmm. So Katy's been really high on that list, and she graciously has agreed to come on the podcast, even though we're on opposite sides of the world. So Katy Bowman, who are you and how'd you get here?
Well, I'll do my academic stuff first, because that seems to be what people think is most relevant. And I'm a biomechanist. It's a branch of kinesiology, study of human movement that focuses on the levers and forces within the body, forces applied to the body, and basically how the mechanical environment influences the experience of the living thing. That's the bio and biomechanics. The mechanics is the physics of it. I would say I'm also a parent. That's also how I got here. I'm very much someone, I have a pretty large body of written work. I'm a writer, as well as, I teach in person, but I do think converting ideas into the written word, because I'm a reader and I learn that way. But for those who've been reading my work for a long time, when I am going through a phase in my own development, that seems to be my laboratory for a lot of the things that I write about. So, Grow Wild, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, was really much, it's a book about a childhood period of time and the development of the child and the role of kind of not just the classic family of, the parents, but also the role of nature and community that goes into forming children. So I do want to say that, I'm a parent in that stage as well. I have older kids, slightly older kids now. They're not littles anymore, but and I'm also here because of the internet. I think it's really important to say, that's a big part of how I got here. Yeah, is because of the internet.
Yeah, we'll probably end up talking about that as well. It's whenever I find myself getting too down on the internet, I always think, well, I got to give the internet credit. It allows me to talk to people around the world, and for better or worse, it exposes me to different ideas. And for me, in a way, you were, obviously I learned about you through the internet. That really goes without saying. But I sort of think of you, I group you with sort of a cohort of people who sort of came on the radar around the same time with, I think, of just doing a really good job of challenging the ways that we thought about exercise and movement, In my head, I kind of group you with some of the paleo movement from the late 2000s. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but in the way, that's kind of how I first heard about you. It's been really interesting to see how your ideas have evolved over time. Um, just for a bit more context, because you do wear a lot of hats, and I think you've done a lot of interesting projects. Can you just sort of talk about what your day to day is like? Because, for example, I know you teach in different capacities. Obviously, you said you write. You're a parent. Can you just give people an idea of how you keep busy nowadays?
And I think it's pretty much always been the same. Being a parent is central to how I spend my time. And I would say even the way I do my work is based on the needs of my kids at the time. So when my kids were much younger and slept more and rested more, I did a lot more writing type
Yeah.
work because that worked out pretty well. I still am a writer, and it's still predominantly what I do. I would say right now I spend a lot of time speaking.
Hmm.
I do a lot of, as I was setting up today, just thinking, I can't believe how large a portion of my life is spent talking to people on their platform. So whether
Yeah.
it's interviews, and I do a lot of, specific media, like larger media
Hmm.
type stuff, not just podcasts for people, but I would say national media, they need an expert for something, and that
Yeah.
takes, a portion of my time. We'll be talking about movement, and I allot, a couple hours a day to moving my own body.
Hmm.
And a large portion of my life is spent figuring out how to get my family moving, and which is my nuclear family, but I would say also my community at large, facilitating those movements in real life.
Hmm.
And that's a very large portion of my time is just me living, not me, the
Yeah.
work, but my work in my life is really the same. So
Yes.
I do think the benefit to those who follow me as sort of uh, an informant on, giving information about something. Informant's probably not the right word, but is because I am in that movement laboratory so much that I'm
Hmm.
always working out movement problems.
Yeah.
And then my writing is sort of like, hey, here's a solution that I found, see if this works for you. Um, I do teach in person. I
Hmm.
teach adults mostly. I do volunteer and teach PE
Oh,
at
cool. I
our
didn't know that.
local schools that don't
Yeah.
have access, like where they've lost the funding for that or whatever. So I
Yeah.
go in and make that a volunteer hour, and I serve on a lot of boards on programs trying to create outdoor education
Hmm.
for usually children, but sometimes children and adults, and supporting those with my attention or my expertise on how to do things larger than community.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, and that's pretty much my day.
Yeah. That's good. I didn't know that you taught PE classes as well. It's I love I love I didn't love PE as a child,
Hmm.
but I love some of the more progressive ways that people think about and teach PE nowadays.
Yeah.
Some of my best resources have come from that. Or often I'll steal an idea from a PE class or a PE lesson, and I'll be working with adults, and then they'll say, "Oh, do you think this would work with kids as well?" I'm like, "Yeah, well, yeah, I imagine it probably would." Yeah, I think of you predominantly as a writer. I mean, I listen to your podcast and everything, but I think that you have a real gift for sort of coining new terms or making
Mm.
ideas or phrases that really sort of stick with people in a way that isn't overly complicated. And I don't normally do any kind of lightning round questions, but you've had so many good and useful terms over the years. I kind of just wanted to share some with our audience so they can get an idea of some of the ideas that you've talked about. Um, and I guess one of the first ones that I really associate with you is this idea of nutritious movement. So this idea of movement in this sort of dietetic nutrition analogy, I thought was really helpful. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that idea, capitalizing on the dietary nutritional framework, which is this idea of, we know that we don't just need calories. There's sort of
Yeah.
these subcategories of calories that we need. We need macronutrients. We have to make sure we have protein, fat, and carbohydrate. And then you could have all those balanced and still be malnourished in some way because you're missing some essential vitamin or mineral. So those are micronutrients. And the same goes for movement. Movement works exactly the same way. So right now, because we live in such a movement drought, we really only talk about movement calories, which are sort of akin to movement minutes, like,
Yeah.
did you move today? Yes or
Yeah.
no? How you moved is not really part of that conversation. At this point, we're just like, were you starving of movement? You ate something? Great. But then there's plenty of people who move for a living, people who have labor intense professions, and they're not reaping the so-called rewards of just moving anything, like
Yeah.
they're like, I move all the time and I have this issue. And then that's when you can go in and say, well, or athletes would be another population where they have pretty high movement minutes, but they are usually not very well balanced in terms of macros or micros. So this idea that you can go in and tinker your movement diet and figure out why it is you're having the physical experience that you're having by looking and making sure that you're not movement malnourished, not in terms of calories. Some people are just low on movement calories and they just need to move something, anything. And then some people can't move because something hurts, in which case, instead of just going for calories, let's start with micronutrient dosing through movement, and figuring out some of these little pieces. And you'd be surprised how quickly your whole physical experience changes. In the same way, if you were, eating ample calories, or you had, pretty good balance of other things, but you were deficient on vitamin D, that deficiency in vitamin D doesn't just hit you in the intestines. You know what I mean? It's not just the parts that are relating to eating.
Right.
That are what we talk about as symptoms of malnourishment. And the same goes for movement. It's not just like your musculoskeletal system is the only part of your body involved in movement. It's the whole thing. It's vision. It's the skeleton. It's the skin. It's the way organs perform. Like all of that really is on the backbone of what your movement diet is like.
Yeah, I love how that metaphor just kind of maps over so many different things. It's just once you get that metaphor, you start thinking about micronutrients, or you think about. I think in one of your books you say, even if we can agree that spinach is a great thing to eat, no one would say that a diet of all spinach is a full diet. And it's one of those things I find myself kind of falling to that analogy all the time. And I can't even remember. I mean, I definitely must have stolen it from you, but then I think I forgot that I stole it from you for a little bit. And when I was rereading, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. I was wondering.
That's Remove Your DNA. And I think it was kale. It was kale and Move Your DNA.
Yeah, I was kale.
Yeah.
Timely at the time. Yeah.
That's right. Kale. That's right. Exactly.
So that's one of the ones I use all the time. One of the other ones I use all the time, and I feel bad because I steal it. And there are probably other examples of adaptive stressors, but you sometimes talk about this idea of the house plant, or the plant in the greenhouse versus a plant that's grown up out in the elements. Can you kind of talk about that and why it's relevant?
Yeah, that's an analogy that comes from Grow Wild, where I was trying to use plants instead of people to make my example. So I tend to do this a lot as a writer. I do think, when we're talking about the way we're choosing to move our bodies, or worse, the way we're sort of setting up our kids to move or not move, the ego can quickly tune something out. So I try to slip things in where you're like nodding when it's a plant, like, of course, like, who would do that to a plant? And then you're like, haha, the plant is you, and then it gets in a little bit. So the plant in a greenhouse is the greenhouse. I'm literally talking about plants in this case, where plants that are grown in a greenhouse don't do well when you transplant them outside. And you would think, like, well, I'm controlling for temperature. I'm controlling for hydration. We're making sure the nutrients get, I've done everything. But the one thing that the greenhouse misses is the mechanical environment, right? You are buffered from winds and bends. And that's the mechanical environment for a plant is the winds, and it's the weather, it's the snow loads, it's the animal interaction, and it's really interaction between trees or other plants as well, because other trees can affect the way a certain tree has access to the wind. So if you ever decided to cut down a few trees, and then all of a sudden those trees fall down later on because they had not felt the wind, because the wind was sort of experienced as a collective, and then you removed a couple and now they're vulnerable because they did not develop experiencing what it took mechanically. And so with plants, what actual growers figured out is if we want to have hardy plants, we have to move them while they're in the greenhouse. So they got like moving tables. They have people who would go in and physically stroke the plants to create what's called thigmomorphogenesis, this response in shape. You're actually growing, you're growing roots, you're branching in direction of those mechanical inputs. And then the logical question is next. It's like, well, then, if this is a kid who's grown up and sort of hasn't felt what it feels like to go outside, then wouldn't staying inside continue to be beneficial for them? Aren't we just adapted to inside? And that would be sort of logical, except that when you take, a plant, an outdoor plant, and grow it inside, it doesn't thrive inside either. Yeah. Eventually, it's like it becomes experiences other forms of malnourishment. So we have to deal with outside at some point. If we're to truly meet all of our needs, whether you're a plant or any living thing has to deal with its sort of natural environment at some point. And so by sort of dosing yourself with hothouse, greenhouse experiences as a way where in plants, for those of us who are growing right now, you harden off your plants. Like if you do sprout things inside, a gardener will start putting them outside to get them acclimated to the outside, the temperature, the light source, the winds. And you don't do it, you don't just throw them outside and say, go for it. You harden them off. And we need to do this with our children and our own bodies as well.
Yeah, I like the point you made about sort of sneaking in the statements, because it is one of those things. Obviously, whenever we're talking about health, nutrition, or especially children, parenting is always going to be a hot button topic.
Sure.
It is always interesting. How do you sort of sneak in these ideas that you hope can take seed in people's head without sort of causing that like reflexive clenching up sometimes when people get what they feel. It's been interesting because we just had we had 6 puppies in the house, and we've just given away the last puppy. They're all going to friends and family. But it's interesting because talking about puppies in a way starts bringing up people's beliefs about child rearing as well. But you much more neutrally talk about, oh, well, I think behaviorism is a pretty good model for bringing up puppies, and talk about what behaviors you want to reward, and talk about things like extinction burst and things like that in a way that you'd never bring up when you're talking about people's parenting. So I really like the idea of sneaking that in. The other analogy that I've been thinking about a lot is obviously astronauts, and thinking about how this analogy of people up in space without gravity, how that can cause a whole cascade of effects. And then sure enough, you brought that up in your podcast the other week as well, about all the interesting implications of being an astronaut and not getting all that beneficial stressors through gravity. All right. The next one I want to talk about is this idea of stress risers, or maybe it's better to talk about your callus analogy. Which is one of those things. When I first heard the callus analogy, especially as an ex-CrossFitter who was always getting blisters and stuff around my hands, it's one of those things that just really changed the way that I thought about training and exposing myself to stress and things like that. So can you expand on that one?
Well, tell me when you heard that. I don't think of that as an analogy, but I want to so when you what did it change the way? What did you think before? And what did you think after?
So if this is right, then as I understood it, when you were talking about the callus, maybe analogy isn't the right word, but talking about this idea is that a lot of times when we get an injury, a mechanical injury, or even if you look at like an engineered mechanical product, often it's going to be at this liminal zone where you have some tissue or some sort of design that is going to have different properties than the tissues around it. So it's either going to be stronger, it's going to have differences in elasticity and things like that. And often when we get an injury, it will be close to some other tissue that is often highly trained. So you're going to see this mismatch between tissue that is really highly trained and adapted to some form of stress, and then tissue that isn't. And then with the callus analogy is that often, when people get a bloody callus or bloody hand, it's often it starts in the skin near the callus because it has different properties. So that's how I understood it.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. So, right. So, the way that a callus works is a callus is an area, like if you just imagine picking up a bar, hanging from a bar, the places that you're contacting the most are there's a greater load to the skin in that area, and then the skin sort of beefs up in that area and is there to serve that movement better in the future. And so I always tell people, you're trying to grow your calluses like almost together, and instead of putting all of your weight on a single callus, you sort of try to distribute it. But yes, where you're going to end up if you train, faster than your skin can adapt, you add some extra weight and you try to do something, you're going to tear at the place in that transition zone between one tissue type and another. Now it's all skin, but the properties of it are a little bit different. So when you have an injury in your body, and especially I think that's from Move Your DNA as well, for many people, it's right at the space where you've got tissue that's really adapted to, let's say, the kale, your movement kale, but the rest of your body is starved for movement. So you develop sort of these zones of adaptation to the single mode, usually mode of exercise, or even if you're doing a couple modes. And the challenging thing also, Move Your DNA, is a lot of our training, when we talk about, cross training, it's not meeting a wide variety of movement nutrients as much as we think it is. Your body sitting in a chair is not as different from sitting on a bike as you might think, as opposed to playing ultimate frisbee. You can pick these radically different types of movement that would keep you from getting essentially a callus in one spot, and you would be trying to grow all of your calluses together so you don't really have a weak zone or a vulnerable zone in your tissue. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then as you said, and I think going back to your nutrition analogy, you're right. We spend so much time on kale, whatever it is, and it sort of becomes our whole world. And I think it's very easy to become myopic, especially when we think of movement as exercise, and exercise as something that's done in a gym environment with very specific movements. I think it makes it really easy to sort of develop these very specific, calluses, while missing everything else. All right, the last one I want to talk about, which I guess isn't really, I guess it is a metaphor in a way. It's really more of a phrase I've heard you say a lot recently. I think maybe you said it in dynamic aging, but I know I've heard you say it in the podcast as well, which is this idea that your body is your biography. Sometimes the skeleton is your biography. I've heard it phrased different ways. Can you talk about that? And I guess also this idea of maybe accumulation of habits versus what we think of as aging or other sort of inevitabilities.
Right. So they're definitely, those two statements are related, but also separate. So I'll start with, your skeleton or your body is your autobiography. I say it mostly with regards to your skeleton because of Wolff's Law. So it's just trying to really help convey the idea that so much of your physical experiences is a result of the loads that you've created throughout your body. So if we go back to the plants in the greenhouse, the fact that like we're just like trees. So, if you look at any tree that you've got in your yard or that's around you, you can recognize certain things about trees, that their genetics are consistent across the board. Their leaf shape and the way their bark looks, but their unique branching is very much based on the nutrients that they get, and not just what they're pulling up from through the air, through the ground, but the mechanical nutrients. And so much of our body is shaped by the loads that we experience, really during our juvenile period. I mean, that's really where you are setting the adult shape of your body. And so if you think about, and the reason I use autobiography is because you're writing it, right? So like you are, there's a lot of choice here. Now, society is a larger container that we are in. And when you're younger, you don't have as much choice, unfortunately, right now in society. So it's not only an autobiography, but still you are the one creating the loads. The loads are being created within your own body. And then separately, but I think also related is, we talk so much about situations that arise in the body, especially as we get older. I don't know how old you are, but I'm almost 50. And, I think we often misuse the word age or years I have for how long I've had a habit of moving. How long have I been writing kale into my
Mm-hmm.
body? Which is different than how old am I?
Yes.
Because you can't do anything about your age.
Yeah.
But you can absolutely do something about not continuing to write kale in your body,
Mm-hmm.
period, or without any other foods around it. So I think the purpose of that is it's meant to be empowering.
Yeah.
It's meant to be empowering and not chastising, because I do think that a lot of the messaging around physicality is focused on genes, certainly with the
Mm-hmm.
discovery of genes, and
Yes.
genes are extremely important to understand, but they are a portion of the story.
Yeah.
And they are the portion of your story in which you can do the least about.
Right.
So when it comes to, what's going on, like folks will always say, like my old sort of, it's a joke, but it's not, it's actually, I've had this conversation multiple times and people will be talking about, their knee or their shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, what's going on with that? They're like, oh, it's just age. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, how old is your other shoulder?
Yeah, exactly.
How old is your other knee? And like,
Yeah.
right, like just that basic logical thing. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
this is not age. This is a length of habit that you've etched into one versus the other.
Yeah.
So it's not completely separate from years, but
Mm-hmm.
it's in a way that you're able to take some action,
Yeah.
when you get any sort of news.
I think it is empowering, because I think, a lot of people do have this sort of narrative about aging, or what they think of as aging as being this inevitable thing. And what is always amazing is we work a lot with older populations as well. It's amazing how quickly people can get some things back. It's
Oh, yeah.
amazing how often narrative holds people back from even trying, and how much of it is confidence and just opportunity to try and put yourself in that place. And I don't want to oversell my experience with what we've done in the past, but the number of times I've been working with, even with people who honestly have had knee replacements and things like that, and have thought, well, that's my life over. And then you see what they can get with just 6 months of just allowing themselves to play with the environment and figure out what their body's capable of. And it is just really amazing for people who I think had consigned themselves to essentially being old for the rest of their lives.
Well, I mean, just to go back to the movement as nutrition analogy, it's like our whole understanding of our bodies is coming from a drought.
Yes.
You're in a drought, and that drought is the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And so everyone's trying to make sense of physicality in a drought or in starvation mode, and they're starved or dehydrated from a lack of movement. And that's not even on the table.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, you were starting at such a place of malnourishment that we can kind of pick any vitamin here to throw in here, and you're going to feel amazing. Like we can pick any macro. Like they don't even have to be particularly balanced, and then for the person who has been, eating that kale consistently or doing that one mode, there's some psychology here. Like there's a lot of psychology for some people around this, but it's the same thing. It's like, I'm just going to have you make some micro adjustments to your kale. So now it's not complete kale. It's got this other thing slightly with it. It's not even kale anymore, but it still looks like kale, but it's slightly different. It's got some other things in there.
And sprinkling iodine on it or something.
Exactly. Adding salt or exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just like, because we are coming from such a deficit, I go back to the empowering piece, because it's like, pick anything, pick anything. And you are going to notice some improvement.
And I think that's an important point, because, we're talking amongst ourselves, so we're going to use the word deficit. I think of it in my head as well. But even back when I was still working in gyms and things like that, you're right. It's like just getting people to pick up something, that even kind of approached the intensity required to tap into Wolf's Law, but just getting people to do something. It was amazing how quickly so many people can make progress. And it's funny, because people will often jump to these specialized powerlifting programs and, twiddling this percentage and that percentage. Like, honestly, if you just move some heavy things from A to B, pick things up and get your body over and under things, you're going to see amazing feedback. Obviously, people want to go and start optimizing things right away. But I think you're absolutely right. If someone's got scurvy and they've got rickets, and they've got a bunch of other things, and you're like, well, just try eating some fruit and go outside and see what
Yeah.
happens, both metaphorically and literally. And it is amazing. You touched a lot on psychology, so I think it'd be worth kind of talking about your new book. So in some ways, I think I saw inklings of your book in the past. And what I mean is, I don't want to put too much on it, but you've talked so much about in the past, how do we fit exercise into our lives? And this kind of tension between actually going out and doing deliberate exercise versus working in various kinds of movement snacks, or just sort of folding movement into our lives. And this newest book, it really talks a lot about that, but it also talks about the psychology, the stories and narratives that people have around exercise. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the genesis of the book, how it started, and then we can kind of talk about it in some detail.
Well, the type of psychology the book focuses on is ACT therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, which has a lot to do with psychological flexibility. The bulk of what my work has been is becoming more flexible with the stories that we have around movement. So the one I'm most known for is there's more to movement than exercise, right? Because I think a first point of inflexibility for many people is movement equals exercise.
Yep.
And if that is a construct that you have in your mind, it makes it very challenging for exercise adherence, because exercise is a leisure time activity, right? And so, it's all fine and good when you're younger, but then you start, then you have to work, and then you have family, or you have you're managing death or divorce or financial issue, right? Life comes up, and you slowly are robbed of that exercise time. And because we live in a movement drought, we put all of our eggs in the exercise basket, so to speak. That inflexibility of mental construct is what keeps you from exercising. You literally see no other opportunities for it by the way you've defined it. If I can't get to the gym, and then you can think of another inflexibility is not just exercise, the amount of time it takes, right? Like, I've got this protocol. This protocol it's 45 minutes of this, and something came up, my car, my kid was sick, or something happened. Now I can't do anything.
Yep.
because 20 minutes did not count.
Yes.
Right? It was a 45-minute protocol. So those are just two easy examples. Or another example would be, I have no time.
Yep.
I can't move my body. I have no time. The book. So, well, just jump ahead. So a psychologist who had been following my work for a long time was like, you are actually applying ACT therapy to movement, which no one's ever done before. I didn't know that I was doing that. I was just saying, you have to just relax your mind a little bit. Like, you're really rigid in your thinking here about what counts and what doesn't count. And that is your mental muscle is sort of blocking your arms and legs from being able to do anything. So you have to start with the mind. So she reached out and said, would you come on my podcast and talk about it? And so, we went back and forth for a while, and I thought, I think there's actually a book here. And the book that I wanted to write was, sometimes you'll pick up a book and it's just going to explain what ACT therapy is, just like a book explaining what fascia is, like whatever, it's like, it's a nonfiction sort of technical book. And I did not want to write that book. That book would be great for therapists.
Yes.
I wanted to write a book that was for the movers, and for the health professionals, and for the exercise teachers, and for the physical therapists who are like, I can't make this happen. All these excuses are coming up. And so the book is actually going through 44 examples. We polled thousands of people, and we really got them down to these 44, and they're not identical to everyone's, but enough of your main, where the psychology is getting in the way, holds true. And we just wrote a book of just answering the psychological and the reframing, the psychological tool and the reframing for each one of these excuses. And that goes for athletes who can't stop eating only spinach, to people who've they've been sidelined by an injury and love movement so much, but can't do their physical therapy exercises. because, right there, because it's not what this other thing was, to
Yep.
people who are like, I have a newborn and I don't see how this fits into, I have such a longing to do this. Like my desire to move my own body is there, but I can't, all the across the spectrum. Um, my parents sort of used movement as a punishment. They were so gung
Yeah.
ho,
I
and
remember
now I
reading
hate it.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I hate it. I hate my PE experience was terrible,
Yep.
and I'm not whatever it is. And so I don't know. I love that book. You can tell I'm excited about it. But
Yeah. So a few things I'll say about it. You mentioned all the people you wrote it for, like various practitioners,
Mhm.
but I just need to say it's great for just lay people. It's great for normal people. The language
yeah,
is really accessible, and even reading it, it's for everybody. But as I read it, it made me think a lot about Jill, my wife's experiences as she had two kids and like kind of her changing relationship with exercise. And I think there are a lot of points that made me sort of understand previous female clients and women in my life, even though it's not exclusively for women. It really made me think about how I have had a different relationship with exercise than other people in my life. So it's a really good book for everybody, and I think everyone will see a few things that they do. Like I'm really guilty of sort of catastrophizing or all or nothing exercise sometimes,
Mhm.
even though I'm quite flexible. If I do get in a program, like all of a sudden I find myself getting to spreadsheet brain and just kind of say,
Mhm.
oh, well, I didn't tick this. Um, you sort of alluded to it, but you spoke so eloquently on this idea of mental inflexibility. I guess we could talk about this idea of behavioral stretching a little bit, because that's one of the big ideas that really came out of that. Can you kind of talk about what that is and how that's a tool that people can use?
Yeah, behavioral stretching is just to start doing something outside of your comfort zone.
Mhm.
A big part of ACT therapy is the accepting part is accepting the discomfort.
Mm.
Like we're really good at doing reps with our body. Like if you have a weakness in your musculoskeletal system, you're like, great, I'm gonna
Mhm.
go do some reps. The
Yeah.
reps for the mind, I think, is dealing with discomfort. Like
Mhm.
how often do you choose a modality of movement that you suck at? Would
Yes.
be one.
Yeah.
And I'll just use myself as an example. So right now I am rowing. I just
Mhm. Oh,
joined a
cool.
novice row team. I don't know how to row.
I'm also on
It
a row team.
Are you?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
well, I could pick your brain. So I don't know anything about it. And
Yeah.
but for me, one of the ways I like to stretch my behavior a little bit is to take myself out of, it's real easy to get in like, I'm an expert in movement. I always teach movement. I think
Mhm.
if you're a movement teacher, you should absolutely be being trained by someone else in something different than what you're already good at so that
Yes.
you can uh, keep up. I mean, one, stay humble, but
Yeah.
two,
Yeah.
don't forget how to learn. You
Yes.
have to keep learning how to learn. And
Yeah.
and then, you have to, like, the discomfort is like, oh, I'm going to be terrible at this,
Yeah.
and the coach is going to be yelling at me to like fix this thing. And I'm going to make the mistake that the rest of the team is, I'm going to crab my, whatever. And I'm going
Yeah.
to, but the stretching of it is doing it anyway
Yes. Yeah. I
and recognize you're not going to die. You're not going to die of embarrassment ever, ever,
Yes.
ever. But a
I
lot of people
almost
have
have.
died from not doing the thing that the
Yeah.
embarrassment was keeping them from doing,
I was
like move their
as you were
bodies.
saying that, I was laughing because I sort of forced, but also decided to go on a sort of acrobatic dance, soft acrobatics, 5 day retreat a few months ago in Portugal, and it was good. It was so out of my comfort zone because I don't dance, I don't do acrobatics, but it's something I've been really interested in. And obviously, everyone there was lovely. People were really nice, but I was pretty sure I was the only person there who had kids. And it's like by day one, it was very well. It was really obvious that I was like technically the worst person. They're not in a horrible way. I could participate. Um, but it is so important to be back in that position where you have to experience what it's like to be the novice in the room and how difficult it be and hear all the self-talk. There's all this self-talk I
Oh,
had that
so
I
much
haven't
self-talk.
heard in my head in
Mm-hmm.
about 20 years. And it just
Mm-hmm.
all came out again, because I just sort of ensconced myself in these movements that I felt comfortable about. And I knew that I can coach and show and demonstrate. So yeah, 100%, getting out of your comfort zone is so important.
And those are personal experiences that have to do with kind of fitness. But another example for the book is the mom. And
Hmm.
and the book is written for for everyone, but
Yeah.
both Diana and I are women. And so, and I do think that there's a skew towards fitness, I think, towards just the male perspective,
Yes.
just, like, I don't think it's for one or the other, but, like, certainly I'm almost always the only woman on the bookshelves. Like
Yeah.
when you look at sort of the canon of classic movement books.
Yeah.
But there's like a mom who's like, I want to do, I have heard that my kids need nature. They need movement in nature. I have 5 kids. Like I am not skilled in getting them outside. I am scared of doing it. And so this idea of slow behavioral stretching. So it's not like, just do it and you'll be great. It's like, okay, well, start by going into a place that's fenced and it's not really exposure therapy, but you're gathering skills over time.
Yep.
You're going out and, get yourself some cones and get a whistle and like start a game,
Yep.
send everyone out and say, when you hear this whistle, run back to me, and you're just sort of training everybody. And so you're not letting the ring around you and the way you can move get smaller and smaller and smaller over time. And that's what happens to people as they get older. That's really what's happening, is because they're not out there pushing against that ring and opening themselves up to new experiences, you just ratchet it down and it just gets smaller and tighter over time. Then you get an injury and then you can't even do the movements that you used to do and you got nowhere else to go. So, so keep pushing. If you're not motivated by a better balanced movement diet, be motivated by, this is opening up movement opportunities for me that I haven't discovered yet, and will keep my zone of movement growing and not contracting.
Yeah, it's one of the things we always think about as well. And you see those models show up all the time, like Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, and then all the fear of falling cycles and, various pain avoidance cycles. It's so, you see it over and over and over again, this sort of contracting element. And you're exactly right. I mean, anything we can do to kind of expand the opportunities, expand the capabilities so people can interact and do what's meaningful for them. That's actually ties in really well with my next question, which is, in the book, you sort of speak about this idea of identifying your core values, but then also thinking about your core movement, not core as in like trunk muscles, but like what are the movements that are meaningful to you both now and in the future, and kind of identifying what is important to you in moving. It's one of the things we think about a lot as well. I was wondering, can you kind of talk about that and why that's important to you and why that's important for others?
Well, values are so central to our psychology because we are always chasing our values. Our values, I think of like for cyclists, we're drafting behind our values a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're that connected, or for many people, they have not connected movement to their values. So their values are sort of leading them away from movement because they know how the other things that they're choosing to do relate to their values, but they don't know how exercise relates to their values. And this is a big point that I've brought up in my work for over a decade. And it's a tricky thing that I think movement instructors or like movement professionals need to hear is, for movement professionals, presenting movement, helping others are their values.
Yeah.
And so we've woven it into our daily life and we're like, look how easy it is. But it's like when you move for work, when you're moving because it's your value to like teach others and you've made movement the thing, that's a big part of why it's easier. It's not that you've got better willpower than other people or you're less lazy than anyone else. It just happens to be, without you having to do very much, they align very well. Where someone else might have better organization of finances because that aligns with their values. And so, but we wouldn't say it's someone's willpower when they don't have their finances organized. But for some reason, physical health, health is a value of mine. And if health is a value of yours, then it's probably easier for you to schedule movement. But we all need movement, even if health is not our value. So it's the idea of, how do I reconcile the values I do have with movement. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a workshop that Diana and I teach on its own, which is pretty massive, but it helps you
Yeah.
identify what your values are and then figure out how movement either helps you better express your values. Like if you believe in, if you want to show up as a compassionate, kind person,
Mm-hmm.
but you're sort of, a raging mess if you don't get your daily exercise in,
Yeah.
then exercise for you is actually helping you show up as a compassionate, peaceful person.
Yeah.
Or you could do it the opposite way, where you are looking for a task that allows movement to actually be the conduit to the value. So like an example would be you like volunteering. Being of service is a value of yours. So you could choose then to go to the food. You're looking for a dynamic way, a movement rich way to embody that value. So it could be like, I'm going to go down in the way that I'm going to choose to value is like, for me, I teach PE. I
Mm-hmm.
donate that time. I value children getting outside and supporting our educational institutions that are struggling.
Yep.
So I will put my body in that space. And now I'm out on the tarmac and I'm, playing basketball and I'm, turning the jump rope and I'm leading games, for that period of time. That's very dynamic for me. That would be, I could also volunteer to be on the PTA.
Yeah.
And live up my value by, showing up and doing that meeting. But
Right.
it's not stacking or layering movement and a value for me. Or let's say I like to go to that meeting, but I'm going to say, before we start this meeting, everyone has permission to stand up and move around and stretch while we have this meeting. I'm going to change sort of the culture of that meeting to be a way that allows people to feel better in their bodies as they are living out their values of service. Or you volunteer at your community garden, or you go to your food bank on the day when they need unloading boxes and stacking things up. That's very physical. So you're looking for physical ways of embodying a value. And then your other question, I'm sorry, I forgot what it was. It was the second part of that.
Oh, that was pretty good.
Okay.
I thought you answered it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we were talking about we were just talking about core values and then this idea
core moves.
Core movements, yeah.
So the core movements are there movements for you? And this is part of a way of that has more to do with an exercise planning, which would be, we are bombarded right now with lists of 1 million exercises. You know what I mean? Like we are in the age of over information. We've passed the age of information. We're in the age of over information. So how do you make sense of like research really shows like if you can get 3 moves, you can commit to those moves, and they don't have to say the same 3. I wrote a book, My Perfect Movement Plan, and that's really just about constantly checking in with yourself for like this quarter or this 6 weeks or how you can set the pacing. What am I focused on right now? I'm going to just focus on that. And so you could look at what moves would support my core values. So for me, let's say active transport, like environmental action is you have a lot of value towards walking with a softer footprint, on the earth, so to speak. Well, then like, what would it take for you to transport yourself actively? Is that getting a bike and like being able to ride a bike? Is that walking? Is that just being able to walk to public transportation? And then you could say, yes, that's going to be my core move is like every day I'm walking, for a certain amount of getting myself from point A to point B. Or maybe you would like to be able to walk from point A to point B, but your low back hurts so bad or your knee hurts so bad, in which case your core move could change to something just for those areas, to nourish those areas for the future desire of walking, more or transporting yourself more actively. So that's just an example of core moves. It's like, what are moves that can support my way of moving towards my values?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, going back to the book, I think obviously making the movement meaningful and not feeling like it's something that's foisted upon you makes such a difference. it's one of the things we think about a lot is how do you make that shift? So I don't know if I like the word agency, but I'll use word agency to kind of allowing people to develop their own agency, because I think so often exercise, if we're talking about movement in the context of exercise, is seen as something that people are supposed to do because their doctors told them to do it, or it's obligatory, or whatever. Um, and it's amazing because so often is presented this way, where there's a disconnect, where I don't think people, it's not they don't realize the benefits, but it's that I don't think they realize that actually it can really allow them to enjoy life more, and through exercise and movement they can enjoy life and sort of, I don't know, touch all the things that are meaningful to them.
Well, imagine that you were told that you had to eat
Mm-hmm.
protein, carbohydrate, and fat, and then you were taken to the buffet,
Mm-hmm.
and there was boiled chicken,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
olive oil,
Yeah.
and toast,
Yes.
and you hate olive oil.
Yep.
And instead of saying there is 117 options here,
Yes.
and the same goes for every one of these categories. And I think that that's the problem with exercise. Is exercise, it's the problem with the way we think about exercise and our lack of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the messaging and the same examples, it's like we keep talking sort of about the same modes, but there's a lot of things like maybe vigorous gardening is your jam.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
exactly.
Like just put on some music. Like you can just, there's not long lists of food substitutions with exercise.
Yeah.
It's always these same sort of, they're clinical.
Yes.
They're clinical because the people who create them, myself
Yes.
included,
Yep.
coming from that field, are doing it in a clinic.
Yes.
Like
Yep.
they have to measure it, but that's not the way
That's
it's
what I was
done
going to
in
say.
real life.
Yes, exactly.
Like if you talk to the Italian culture about eating and balanced eating, you're going to get a
Mm-hmm.
completely different experience than if you go to a nutritional laboratory and a university for
Mm-hmm.
eating things. So it's just recognizing that you just haven't found the movements that you love yet,
Yeah.
but they're out there.
It's interesting. Like, I think you pointing to this problem of clinical advice or overemphasis on quantification, or all kinds of, like, I don't know, type 3 errors, or all these things that we see, the classic advice of move more, eat less, calories in, calories out, all these things that are, like, at one level technically true. Like in public health, we draw the distinction sometimes between this idea of um, effectiveness and efficacy,
Mm-hmm.
and this idea that efficacy is whether or not an intervention works in a clinical setting, and effectiveness is does it work in real life. So the difference between the advice that might come out of a metabolic study, for calories in, calories out on a bike, versus what happens when you have a real life with friends and social obligations and things like that. And I guess I'll talk about what we talked about before we got on the air, which is, as you mentioned, you're famous because of the internet, and I think the internet, or largely because of the internet. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you probably would have been fairly well known otherwise, because you're a good writer and you're a good communicator. But you're famous because of the internet up to a certain point, and you sort of came around, or you came on my radar, like I said, late 2000s, sort of the paleo movement. And I think the paleo movement, or the ancestral health movement, all these other, there are different facets of it. In a way, it kind of threw a lot of the traditional advice upside down. And not necessarily because it was ascientific, but I think because it couched a lot of these narratives in ways, things that were meaningful to people. This idea of moving different ways, or maybe not worrying so much about the food pyramid and just focusing on high quality foods. We didn't really use the word ultra processed back then, but trying to avoid ultra processed foods, which, I mean, there could be a whole reason why those benefits were there. It could just be that it got more people to cook. It could just be that it got more people to think about things. But I think it was really powerful, and all these things sort of came out of the paleo movement. Whether it was people being skeptical of certain kinds of oils, or whether it was wearing barefoot shoes, whether it was being skeptical of certain kinds of observational nutritional studies that came out over time. It could be a whole bunch of things. And I think overall it was a net good, and I think it was really good that we had that conversation. But one of the things that I worry about when I look at the internet now and I look at Instagram and kind of what it's metastasized into, I worry that like a lot of those compulsions, and a lot of the skepticism towards institutions and everything has just sort of almost become a parody of what it was. And sometimes I worry if things have gone too far, or maybe just the way these ideas are distributed, maybe we don't have a good counter narrative now. I know that's a big question, but I think you have a lot of insight on this. So before the interview started, I said one of the things I really like about you and on your podcast is you keep things really well grounded, and you do a good job of sort of keeping things normal. And I think we've lost that capacity. So
I don't know if normal has ever been a word anyone.
Well, I don't know. I mean, nobody's normal. I just kind of want to throw some ideas around with you because it's interesting. There was a time where you had to go online to the internet, and now the internet is everywhere. And probably internet culture is mainstream culture as much as we have anything. And
God, I hope
I'm
not.
Well, I don't know.
I know.
I don't know where you want to take the conversation, but
yeah, I had never really thought of that before, but I can really appreciate what you're saying here, which is, like I never really thought of myself as a paleo person.
Yeah.
But certainly I was of at that time.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think a big part of what paleo ancestral health was, if we just want to call it a different word, it was maybe it was a cross-cultural perspective. We had gotten really focused on looking at our own culture. And did you read that book, Weird?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're familiar with that.
Yeah,
so the idea of like really trying to gather a bunch of information just about how people were behaving that was largely societal, but was maybe being confused with biological.
Yes.
And so I think what was really great about the paleo movement is it kind of stripped away societal for a second. And it's like, wait a minute, what about humans who live in a radically different way?
Yeah.
And you could think about it as people who lived a long time ago. My work's always been more grounded, I would say, in modern hunter-gatherers. Like these are people that we share the planet with right now. So we've got some other data points on people who live right now.
Yep.
So yeah, we haven't been very good at doing cross-cultural comparisons. When I was in graduate school, that's actually what I focused on.
Oh, interesting.
Was cross-cultural data on I was looking at pregnancy and I was looking at back pain because in my mind I was like, this really, it didn't make sense to me that that we would be so blindsided and injured from everyday occurrences.
Yes.
Like pregnancy, pregnancy when you're like even younger, you know what I mean? Like when your body's even stronger. And so for it to be this really tricky thing, I thought was, and it's not to say that I think nature is benign and that no one should have, but like population wise, to have like such high numbers of people struggling from biological imperatives. I thought, well, it doesn't reconcile with my understanding of like evolutionary biology a little bit. So, but I had not thought about that was maybe the beginning of challenging or devaluing institutions as a whole, right? Like, well, if you had this many false takeaways, then therefore everything that comes out of you will be false, which is that's a logical fallacy. I mean, that's not really being actually that scientific. You just have to to look at every claim, but it's easy. How
people can come to that
conclusion. Of course, because like Carl Sagan said, like what happens when you have a society that's sort of built on a backbone of science as your way of knowing.
Yep.
And no one really understands science.
Yes.
It's going to be easily confused. I mean, he made that prediction decades ago, and I think we are here for sure. I think we are here. And it is very interesting. Like I think that we have to delineate now at this point. Like we can't call everything the internet. We can't call everything the internet. Like the internet is a tool. Like we have to, and I think this is really important for kids. It's been something I've done in my own family is like, we don't say phone.
Yeah.
We don't say, like, we really break it down to like, well, what are we talking about here? We don't say screen time. I think screen time is another very poor catch-all term that is not very helpful. So it's like, we have these big lists of like, what is on the screen? And we come up with every single thing. And actually I also volunteer and teach a really great program called Cyber Civics for anyone out there working with children at any capacity. Highly encourage you to check that out. In walking, I will volunteer and teach this course at our public schools too, which is about becoming a citizen who understands how the internet works, to be able to break down some of these conversations. But yeah, like whatever is happening on social media, I am if you're on there yourself, it can feel like the whole world.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't think it's the whole world. But I do think if that's where your eyes are a lot of the time, and that's your main source of information gathering.
Yeah.
And we're at a place now where you can no longer, like, I think for a long time, you could trust what you saw with your eyes. And I think you can still do that when you're looking in the world. But I do not think you could trust your eyes and ears necessarily. Like it's not a place to depend on your senses.
No.
And that struggle for sensory, like we don't have a way. And if you're not necessarily trained in skepticism and, and thinking for yourself, or investigating for yourself or even reading a full article, and then checking the sources of that article.
That's what's so pernicious about it is obviously a lot of the language can be, you'll hear people see like, do your own research, make your own decisions, figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
But, how many people, have the literacy, scientific literacy to read a full paper and not just maybe look at the abstract or not just drop it into ChatGPT. And this idea of research, or even just this idea of skepticism, which I think has sort of mutated into a kind of cynicism, or like you said.
And that's not what it means. It's not it is basically like, can you make a symbolic logic? Like, can you actually track an argument? Like that is really what I mean by skepticism. Can you track an argument?
And then, based on your reference to Carl Sagan and everything like that, like, when you talk about skepticism, I think I have a pretty good idea of, the body of work and thinking that you're alluding to. But it is interesting how you'll see that exact same language sort of used by people who are doing the exact opposite. Yeah, it is really tough. And it's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, because there's that insult people say on the internet, which is go outside and touch grass, which just means you're spending too much time online and, just go outside in the real world. And it is amazing how just getting back outside and spending time in the physical world and spending time with your body in this kind of embodied existence does seem to be a nice antidote to people who, sometimes they call it internet poisoning or brain poisoning and stuff like that. But it does seem like perhaps the solution is to focus on the local, focus on the people around you, volunteer at your school, find some friends and go outside and move. I mean, to me, that always seems like, it's like you said, it feels like the whole world, the internet. But as soon as you turn the screen off, it is amazing how you can just go outside and have really nice conversations with people. And I think that is important for people to remember.
Yeah. I mean, in the United States, our national public radios and NPR. And so Diana, my co-writer of this other book, we just wrote a piece for that. And I actually wrote at the end, like, as the kids say, go touch grass.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know if is it an insult or is it wisdom? Where you're sort of melting down. And I don't even think it's the people online. I think it's the way it's what social media pulls out of people. It's not the people themselves.
No, you're right.
And I think that that's a good thing to just keep in mind. This is perhaps the way the whole thing is supposed to work. That it is built to invoke such strong responses that are thoughtless. They're mindless. And I don't mean I don't mean stupid. I don't mean unintelligent, it's, I can be guilty of the same thing. I hear something and then I
Yeah, it's
have the
reflexive.
first thing that bubbles up. But yeah, it's exactly. It's reflexive, and it's thoughtless in the sense of I haven't given any time to actually hear what you say, and as
Yeah.
stress rises for everybody, you've got like these feelings. It's like almost like we drink all day long carbonated water,
Mm-hmm.
and the burps are sitting there right below the surface, and social
Yeah.
media is like, hey, do you want to burp on this thread?
Yep.
And I usually say fart because it's so much stinkier than burping.
Yeah.
And so I think that I feel like we are primates with a very old software
Mm-hmm.
that was never meant to be
Yeah.
inside an arcade,
Yes.
and our nervous systems are all fried,
Yep.
and we're all in the pot of hot water together, and there's no place to put it anymore. So we're actually going to a place to like burp and fart and
Yep.
vomit and try
Yep.
to regulate. And that's what it is. So when
Yep.
people talk about being a cesspool, and I think other people are like, but look, I can grow a business out of it because I know now if I can get something to create you to feel any emotion,
Mm-hmm.
you will come, just
Yep.
because there's no, it's, we talk about the idea of grounding,
Mm-hmm.
it is, you're trying to put your finger into an electric socket, just allow any current to come through. So touch
Yep.
grass is like, there are other ways to burp off some of that drink. I mean, one, drink less fizzy water,
Yes.
not fizzy water in general, but in the
Yes.
analogy, like you try to get yourself to a place where you are as far away from the frenetic, create a
Mm-hmm.
calmer home. Instead of having a to-do list, we need to start having to not do lists. What can you prune out of your life? What is truly
Yeah.
not essential? You're not going to fall behind if you don't do it. Certainly don't commit and don't do it, but like get rid of those arms of life that are obligatory because everyone else was doing it, and
Yeah.
then figure out other ways to kind of exhale and let some of that gas out. And I think it would
Yeah.
serve you better in the long run.
It's one of the things you talked about in the book is just, I think you're talking about your most recent book, but in relation to parents, there's always going to be more stuff, and you just kind of have to set some boundaries and just
That's
decide,
right.
when enough is enough. And I think that's one of the sneaky things about modern societies. It sort of has like this weird ubiquity where we've lost a lot of boundaries, whether it's like, where does media begin and end? How do we engage with the internet? How do we consume moving pictures, all this stuff? It's just, yeah, you're right. It's how do we start pruning stuff out and really focusing, it really comes back, I guess, to core values, but also recognizing that it's, no one's an island, obviously it's all about sort of the community and the environment we're in.
And we're all in this together. There's
Yeah.
no one who's been here before. So when someone's
Mm-hmm.
not doing it right, you're also not doing, I mean, we're all not doing it right because we've never been in this space. And then, again, almost 50, my identities were sort of intact before I went into this
Mm-hmm.
space.
Yep.
I'm also parenting the first digital natives.
Yeah.
And that's a tremendous responsibility. I mean,
Yes.
it is like we're figuring it out, and the nice thing of the tool of the internet, every tool is either
Mm-hmm.
every object can be a tool or a weapon. It's not
Yes.
what it is, it's how it's
Yes.
wielded.
Yes.
And so I don't think the internet is a weapon, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we're wielding it correctly.
Yeah.
If where we're trying to go is keep a lot of other things about humanity that have been sort of intact, like it's becoming a disruptor, and it is
Mm-hmm.
doing great harm in some ways. And then there's other ways where it's helping people share
Mm-hmm.
information, right? So
Yep.
it's like, how do we support those? Like, I know personally what I'm trying to do is like, I still like the internet for sharing information, but this platform is a toxic platform.
Yes.
So
Yep.
I will remove myself from the platform and go to and find the more like the tool instead
Yep.
of the thing that's been weaponized a
I mean,
bit.
I think that's really important as well, because when we talk about the internet now, we are largely talking about specific platforms, which,
Yeah.
as you said, these are designed, these aren't spontaneous or emergent. Maybe the way that they're monetized, maybe they sort of emerged out in ways people didn't expect. But, these are designed environments that, as you said, are designed to incentivize certain kinds of interactions. Well, I want to be mindful of your time. So one of the questions I end up sometimes using, and I think I'll use on this one because we got off talking about the internet, is what are some things that have you feeling optimistic about the world? What are some things that have you feeling good? And you're like, you know what, things are moving in the right direction. I saw this the other day, or I see this happening, and I think we're going to be okay.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a continuation of what we just said. I just did a public event, that had hundreds of people, and I spent 2 days just with, one person after another who had been following my work. So much of what I do is put out into the void, right? You're a
Yeah.
writer, you write a book and you send it out and you get letters. I still get letters, which is lovely. Thank
That's
you. And
nice.
it is nice. And you get, some digital feedback, people
Hmm.
responding, sending an email, leaving a comment or whatever. But in general, I tend to attract a group that's not really digital communicators, which is nice.
Yeah.
Um, is how people's lives are organizing for the better in many ways. Certainly,
Hmm.
there's a lot of disorganization. Like people are experiencing tremendous losses.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just uh, there's a lot of systems breaking down right
Hmm.
now. And
Yep.
like I think about when we were in school, and you're like, this empire fell, or
Yep.
people all did this, and then this was the age in which they didn't do that anymore.
Hmm.
Keeping in mind that that was over probably 70 years, and like
Yep.
I think we will look back, at least in the United States, but certainly other parts of the world too, because this
Hmm.
phenomenon is sort of a global phenomenon.
I think so. Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, that we would the time of failure, we're going to put it 30 years behind us right now. It'll be like, oh yeah, in
Hmm.
the 80s that failed. Well, I was still
Yeah.
I was still going to school every day, until, but
Yeah.
you just um like humans have had to transition between a lot of systems.
Hmm.
There's countries that have shifted types of government, and there's I can't remember her name. I think her name's Gretchen Bach. We've, in the United States, I'm not sure of everywhere, but I think probably many places, whale oil. Like it was
Hmm.
a culture that was all that used whale oil. Like we had a whole practice around like
Yep.
how we lit, how we illuminated our lives, and then
Yep.
that sort of fell away. So like we are used to doing this. This is not a new zone for humans, but I don't think humans have ever had to do it as uh, sedentary. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? Like it's one thing being sort of physically apt and having to
Yeah.
pivot your mind. I think it actually becomes harder to pivot your mind the less physical you are, or certainly there's a relationship. I mean, that's why we wrote the
I
book, I
agree.
think,
Yeah.
that like about flexible, like being flexible in your life in terms of your thoughts.
Hmm.
There's an overlap, and it's not to say that people who can't move their bodies can't develop really flexible minds, but I think that you're sort of practicing all the time these flexible choice points, and
Yes.
choosing flexibility, the practice of it, and that could be flexibility of just shifting your body around a lot more often.
Hmm.
I think will make you, and we hear this all the time, right? More resilient. You're just
Yeah.
becoming more resilient, and not in the sense of I'm going to be so strong that I'll be the last one standing when
Yeah.
everything else dies around me. I don't think it's that kind. I think it's like we're going to have a resilient family and community. We're going to be able to
Hmm.
pivot. We're going to, like, people can stay here if they need to. I'm going to be okay asking for someone. Like there's just an inner
Yeah.
workings between people
Well,
that I think we need to develop for
it
resiliency.
makes me think, going back to your plant analogy, this idea of bend not break, the
Yeah,
classic
right.
analogy about reeds and bamboo in the wind versus, the rigid oak tree. I
Hmm.
think you're right. I mean, I think things are going to change, and it's probably another podcast.
Things are for sure
Well,
going to change. Like
yeah.
that's the one thing we know is they will just
Yeah,
keep
that's true.
changing.
It's one of the inevitabilities.
That's
It'll
right.
be interesting to see where it goes, and it'll be interesting to see how it all hashes out. And
And it's
yeah, I
not
mean,
going, it's not going without you. Like
yeah,
you have a stroke in the boat too, but
yeah,
and also there's so many more strokes besides you that you're not ultimately like you have. It's like it's the tension between those two things. I'm
yeah,
going to stay and I'm going to contribute, and also I'm going to know that wherever it goes is not purely because I didn't row hard enough,
yeah,
you know or that you have to have that flexibility between both of those positions.
yeah. And I think having kids really crystallizes,
Mm-hmm.
I think it means like, you know what, I've got kids. I want them to have kids. I've got skin in the game. So, understand we can't control everything, but I think that we can make positive changes in the world around us. And I think that's pretty heartening to realize that. I don't know. I guess one of the things I'll finish off is one of the reasons why I moved to Scotland is you go to Scotland and everything still works in a village system. And right now I'm in a little old fishing village on the East Coast, and you still have a butcher, and you still have a baker, and you can walk everywhere. And everything's on a human scale, and it just makes it so much easier to realize that we're all in this together. Because everything is kind of built on a human scale, and I think that anything we can do to go outside, touch grass, interact with each other, I think is going to be a net good.
Yeah, I mean, for people who are listening and like, I don't live in that village, that's
Yeah,
uh,
fair enough.
not available to me.
Yeah.
Then like, how can you create that? Like, is there a
Yes.
place that currently you're getting something online where you could walk in and see that person face to face?
Yeah.
To remind yourself. And that's why I'm saying, like, I don't think it's the whole world. I think that the more you go online, the more you believe that's the whole world, and
Yes.
that the antidote to that is to go spend time in the tangible parts of the world, looking people in the eyes and
Hmm.
seeking it out, and,
Yeah.
and reestablishing some of those habits. Like, everyone's going to have a butcher in their town, for the most part. And even if it's in some place, be like, I don't know the name of my butcher. I'm going to
Yeah.
go find out. Even if it's in a big giant grocery
Yeah.
store, the fact that you're going to do that, versus order online meats or like
Yeah.
whatever, like, is there some shift that you can
Yeah. You know
that
the
you
the
can
Kurt
make?
Vonnegut story about the envelope and writing the letter?
No, but now I'll
It's
go read it. What
Yeah,
does
I'll,
that
I'll
mean?
I'll I'll mangle it. I'll just give you the gist of it. And that's kind of what he's saying. He's like, I still like to write letters, and I know I could just buy a whole bunch of stamps ahead of time. Obviously it's dated, but I like to go down to the post office, and I like to go ahead and buy the envelope. I like to buy the letter because of all the serendipity that happens along the way. I'll see a neighbor, someone will tell me a joke, I'll see something interesting in the store, and it's all these just like little cross connections that happen just when you go
Mhm.
out and do these things. And again, it goes back to this whole idea of quantitative versus qualitative. It's so hard to enumerate all the benefits of just going out there and seeing people eye to eye, like literally looking people in the face. That it's one of those things that obviously the internet is never going to be able to fully replace.
Well,
And
we're
I don't
trying to
know.
replace something that's not missing. I mean, that's
Yeah,
that's that
exactly.
that's the tricky thing, is
Yes.
like, we're making online communities when actual communities
Yep.
exist. And there's
Exactly.
there's of course there's
Yep.
always the, I have a special problem and it
Yep.
helps me to connect with a group of other people who share this special problem, and
Yep.
I get benefit in this community. Fine.
Yep.
And where are all the other places that you've replaced that's not that?
Yep.
Your real person community with the online version. So
Yep.
you don't have to, I mean, humans are just like, it's A or B, it's
Yep.
black or white. We have a real hard time with both. And that's another
Yep.
psychological tool that's kind of central to this
Yep.
book, is figure out what you need and only take what you need.
Hmm.
Don't take it all.
Yep.
We suck it all up, and it's
Yep.
like, just
Yep.
just just cherry pick, not a negative in this case, like, just
Yep.
cherry pick the things that you need, and do not replace all the other things that were working just fine in your life.
Yeah. It's just, I guess it's just about being mindful.
It is,
Um,
exactly. It always
well,
is.
yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. Well, Katy Bowman, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
It means a lot that you took the time to come on. So thank you very much.
it was lovely chatting with you. Thanks for having me.
Day, night. It's a daily exercise. It's a daily exercise. It's a daily exercise.
Hi, welcome back. I mean, there was a lot in there. I scribbled down some quotes as we went through. I really liked your body is shaped by your movement history, and you are how you move. I love that idea of your body as an autobiography, and I know that Katy's written about that in one of her books, and that you write it kind of with every step that you take. The bit about calluses and behavioural stretching really struck me, not just the sort of physical calluses, but also emotional and behavioural ones too. And the idea that adaptation requires exposure and repetition and even a little bit of discomfort. It's such a good way of thinking about learning anything new, particularly as adults who may feel that we should already have got all of the stuff figured out. This is one that I guess I've been thinking a lot about because I've now listened to it a couple of times, and there's just a lot in there around movement woven into everyday life in parenting, in the way that we age and the way that we make sense of the world. Huge thank you for Katy for coming on. I wish we'd had more time to go into working with older populations and with children. I'm also really interested to hear how she would squares the kind of prescriptive and methodical thinking that comes with sort of biomechanists and how they see movement with the kind of varied daily movement. And I guess there's a bit of tension there, and I'd be interested to kind of explore that more. But we could get it back on. There are loads of links in the show notes to resources and books, and a link to the Cyber Civics program that she mentioned. Definitely worth checking out if you're navigating screen time with your children. And if you enjoyed this episode, as ever, please take a moment to subscribe or leave us a review or comment or share it with somebody, because it really helps others find the podcast. We've got some really good conversations coming up. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with Dom Higgins, who's the head of health and environment at the Wildlife Trust. So that's a lot around nature connection and building nature-based communities. And then we've got Dr. William Bird coming on from Intelligent Health. And I mean, we've got a lot of interesting people coming on. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back very, very soon.